All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and I do want to say that I have a great, just another awesome interview. I want to say thank you so much for the last interview, Chris. That was awesome. I have another interview coming up for you guys here from a forester up in the state of Washington. He'll be back from time to time to share some more encounters and experiences he has had, not to mention a lot of the different evidence that he has found and collected. I want to say thank you guys very much for putting up with me and the website. The website is down. I am putting Humpty Dumpty back together again, but for now, until that website is up and running again, you can find all of the great information, the great encounter stories over on the PacWest Bigfoot Facebook page. Just look over to the left, go ahead and click on notes, and there you have it. You can also, of course, follow us here on YouTube, where the stories are all collected in video format for you. So, let me clear my throat and get some sip of some Sasquatch coffee. And thank you so much, Gunner, man. Your Sasquatch coffee. It's Sasquatch Coffee Company. You guys can Google it. It's pretty awesome. Good stuff. All right. So, it has been a few days since I have done this. With the loss of the website, I lost a lot of the stories that I got. And so I've been collecting them back and working on them to get them to you. So please forgive me for being so far and few between with these things, but we're getting back to normal here. So with that, God bless you. Let's get into this week's Bigfoot encounter story. Dad and his 3 kids escorted away by Bigfoot near the Clackamas River. This is a true encounter that happened in the mid-1980s. I am the father of 3 kids, and one day, while heading out to fish on the Clackamas River in Oregon, we were escorted away from our favorite fishing hole by a Bigfoot. I have told my story before, and I believe it was published somewhere online and offline years ago, if I remember correctly. Either way, here is what my children and I not only witnessed that day, but what we went through, to be exact. Fishing with the kids. I am a family man first and foremost, and as far as this family man is concerned, between a good Seattle Mariners home game and fishing or camping, there is nothing more I love to do with my kids. Fishing has been one of our favorite things to do of all, and for the 2 girls, it beat baseball games easily. Our family, my family, are part Native American, a local Clackamas tribe to be exact. Yes, we have our stories to tell of this creature, or better yet, animal called Bigfoot. It is still a whole other experience, however, to come face to face with one. That day was the scariest time in mine and my kids' lives, even more than when my wife and our youngest daughter got into a pretty nasty car accident a few years prior to this Bigfoot incident. Yes, they both came out of it, almost without a single scratch, but it could have been much worse. You should have seen that old Ford. This was different. We were literally about 10, 12 feet from the largest, scariest looking animal I'd ever seen. The old tales and stories I'd heard growing up did not do any justice with what we saw that day, especially when it came to how enormous and dangerous this thing seemed to be, this Bigfoot, this Sasquatch. We went fishing for Bigfoot. We piled in the old Datsun pickup truck that spring morning. We called it the Little Lemon, to tell you the truth. However, I have to mention this. The truck was never a lemon in the sense it would give me issues. Actually, it was just the opposite. That little thing was a champ of a mini truck, if you ask me. Back then, there was little room for all of us in the cab, so I put together a little makeshift seat belt and a little chair for my son, my older son, in the bed of it. He was older, 12 at the time, and the trip would only take about 20 minutes anyways from where we lived. Back then, things like that were okay, and personally, I think it's still a fine thing to do with young people of a certain age. But let's not get into the politics of seatbelts. I have an incredible encounter here. As I was saying, we love to fish. It was something my dad did with me, and it is a pastime and hobby I want to share with my kids. Maybe, hopefully, it would become a family ritual my kids would carry on with my grandkids one day. Being Native American, well, half a Native American, fishing is not just a pastime or sport, by the way. It's also kind of a rite of passage, you could say. It is something that is part of our family's past and culture that is full of importance, pride, and history. I want to just I just wanted to share that with my kids. What I did know, or at least did not take serious for a long time, were the other rites of passage we Native Americans have known about for literally centuries, a creature, an animal called Sasquatch, and the reality of it. That day was a perfect, warm, late spring morning without a single cloud in the sky. We had set out rather early, but not as early as I usually like to. Hey, like I said, I was taking 3 kids with me. It takes a bit to get them going. We were going to our favorite little spot of ours along the Clackamas River, where it would basically flow into some slow-going, almost pools, if you will. We pulled up, and I had my son start unloading the ice chest and the 2 tackle boxes. Of course, my 2 daughters grabbed the fishing poles out of the back as I gathered a couple backpacks, of which one was full of clothes, just in case the girls and boy got too wet and needed to change clothes, plus a towel or 2 the wife slipped in. The other contained some first aid supplies and any extra snacks my wife also decided we might need. She always had a way, a very thorough way, getting us the things we might need while out here. We were parked in a turnaround at the end of an old dirt logging road with a metal rail-like guard blocking the rest of the unused road. I remember when it was a used road as a young man back then. As a matter of fact, I had a summer job up here once setting chokers with my dad for a logging company not too far past where we're going today. We hopped over the rail and started our last bit of the journey. The walk or hike would take about 15 minutes or so, depending on the mood of the kids and the playfulness that ensues on these types of walks or hikes from time to time when we were together like this. And of course, there was some playing around. We were about 10 minutes in when our worlds were rocked. Not shattered, just rocked, as something from what moments before was just part lore for us came out of nowhere. As I said, we were heading into a part of the river that seemed to be more like slow-moving pools. And personally, I believe this Bigfoot had young down there, near them, maybe fishing or eating at the time. Just so you know, on one side of the road, the left side, walking west, you had a semi-steep slope that met the river about 30 yards down or so. On the right side was all mountain, or at least huge hillsides that were and are still thick with pine trees, alders, thick brush. You just can't see past any of it. The road itself was not as wide as it once was. Today is more like an oversized trail with tall grass and bushes that butt up to the middle part of the well-worn old road. We were coming around a bend when my 2 daughters stopped dead in their tracks, and at the same time gasped as if in utter awe. If it was not for me noticing them gasp and stop at that moment, I swore I might have walked right into a monster, and who knows what would have happened then. I turned around to see my son staring at a gigantic monster not 10 feet away from us. I wish I could say I got a great look at the face, and while I did, at first it did not last long, as I remember what my grandfather used to say. Do not look directly at them, son. Look down and move slowly. If it was not for my grandfather telling me a story once while out gathering firewood one day, I would not have known what to do. His words would come to my mind shortly that day. However, at that moment, I was staring at an animal that really did have large ape-like qualities to its face. The nose, however, was not as flat. The brow was heavier, I think, than a gorilla's, and the mouth and eyes were, well, humanish, for lack of better comparisons. It was at that moment that it made a low but deep growl, and it gave us a very menacing look. You could feel that growl, to tell you the truth. It was intense, to say the least. It was at that moment that my mind came back to the present and the fact that my children were starting to sob and cry. As a father in a situation like that, I have to tell you, you feel rather powerless, as if you were in a car accident and watching everything happen in slow motion and you can't do anything to stop it. My wife, upon reflection of her accident, said that is exactly what it felt like. Everything slowed down for a split second. but you were still helpless to do anything about it. Escorted from the scene. I had to calm them down, especially my daughters, and they were starting to literally cry and sob so loudly it seemed to be getting the attention of this creature. And yes, at that point I knew it was Bigfoot. I have to say, it was scary looking. I was freaked out. I was as freaked out as my kids, although I tried not to show it at the time. But looking back today, as a Native American, I wish to say, I believe I was truly blessed to have had this encounter, although I was not sure we would live through it at the time. I started to wave my hand behind me and made a hushing sound in hopes to get my daughters to move closer behind me and to get them to quiet down. I know that sounds a little mean, but in a situation like that, and this thing looking at them and as their sobs grew louder, it was the least I could have done, I think. I then whispered softly to my son to move slowly next to me as I looked into its face. The face was not exactly covered with hair between the nose and the lower brow of the forehead, which eventually led to a slightly cone-shaped head, was almost absent of fur, revealing an almost dark grayish skin color. The brow was thick, I remember, and the eyes, while sunken in below that thick brow it had, were in fact rather big and black. I could see some of its teeth as it was not happy we were there and was giving us almost a scowling kind of look with its mouth partially open. They were block teeth like ours, you could say. At least the ones I could see were. I have read of them having canines. I am not sure of that because I never noticed any at that moment. The nose was not really flat like a gorilla's. In fact, it was more human-like than primate. It was the heavy brow line that gave it the primate-ish look, I think. The feet, I noticed, were covered with hair. However, I could see large, dark, cracked here and there, chipped toenails. They were much like ours as well, not claws like I have heard elsewhere. They just looked like dirty big old toenails. And the feet, this thing was 3 heads bigger than me, putting it around the 9-foot range, and the feet looked to match that size. They had to be at least 16, 17 inches long at a rough guess. As my son moved behind me and the girls followed suit, the creature seemed to turn its upper body, looking back behind it. Twice, actually, within a few seconds. Then it would look back at us with that same menacing scowl. At that moment, I remembered what my grandfather had said so long ago, and I immediately stopped looking directly at this Bigfoot creature in its eyes. I turned my head down just enough to see movement of its head, but what I was looking at now was the torso of an animal that was built bigger and more muscular than any weightlifter I'd ever seen or heard of. His chest and the muscles I could see below the 1-inch long hair was just unbelievably massive. The fear of what this thing was capable of was beginning to hit home as it turned again to look back behind it, and one of its massive arms came into sight. The arms were really massive and extremely muscular. The left hand alone looked as though it could wrap itself around my neck and have its fingers meet. And trust me, I'm 6'1" and not all that skinny. I was really getting to a point of worry and fear, and it was at that point I knew we needed to start moving away, even if it were at a snail's pace. Just me, my kids, and a fishing pole. I slowly drew out a fishing pole as my kids were now in back of me, and like a sword in hand, I held that thing out in front of me as we started inching backwards together, back the way we came. For every 2 steps we took, though, that Bigfoot took 1 step and always seemed to stay within 10 to 12 feet of us at all times. So I kept the fishing pole outstretched towards it, as if that would stop any attack that would come. Yeah, right. Well, at least it made me feel better. It took us 20 minutes, give or take, to get back within 10 feet of the old Datsun pickup. The Bigfoot again turned its upper body from about the waist up to look behind it, and it had done that every other minute or so as we backed our way out upon reflection later. That is when I realized that maybe, just maybe, it was doing the same thing I was doing at that moment, trying to keep my kids safe. Maybe its offspring were down there by the river at that moment. I would never know, but That was the feeling I got, and one I still feel to be true today. My son slowly walked over to the passenger door and motioned for his sisters to get in. He also got in the cab himself, even though that would leave little room for me. At least it was enough to get in and drive away. Comfort in the cab was not on my mind at that moment. I still kept my eyes focused near the torso of the beast before me, and I slowly but surely made my way to the driver's side door, opened it, closed it behind me gently. It still stood there, and as I looked at its face one more time, I could tell that it was not happy we were still there. And this time the teeth were showing even more. I turned over the car, and the noise made the creature take a step back. At that moment, it also growled again. This time it was a louder growl, not a scream or a holler, just a fierce, angry, deep growl I could hear over the little engine. I backed up slowly, very slowly. That Bigfoot was twice as tall as this truck, and I knew that if I was to move too fast, it might set that thing off and it would smash the little pickup, and with me and my kids in it. But we were safe, finally. On the road again. I just can't wait to get on. We finally reached the main highway, and wouldn't you know it, a car passes by going 55 miles per hour. I thought to myself they had no idea what just happened to the people in the little faded lemon-colored Datsun pickup they just sped past. Neither could I, to tell you the truth. Shock was what I was starting to feel at that moment. I knew I had to keep calm, though, and so I did. It took a moment. I looked down at the floorboard and breathed in and out for a few seconds before putting the truck into first gear and leaving the scene entirely. But before looking in my rearview mirror, knowing I would never fish in that area again, ever. The kids continued sobbing for a few more minutes, but eventually it had turned to tears of relief and joy, I think. My own heart and blood pressure seemed to have finally settled as we cruised along. Like I said above earlier, I do feel rather blessed to have had this encounter, but just so you know, I do not think I would want to have it again, especially with my children around, or grandchildren. These things, these creatures, these Bigfoot are real. They exist, and I've come to believe that the Central Oregon area is a hot spot, and has been for a long time now. So if you're looking for a place to poke your nose around Bigfootin', I suggest the Clackamas River area, especially outside of the city of Estacada. Thank you.